Hello, my name is Pollux, and welcome to my channel. I'd like to start off by saying thank you to those that have recently subscribed, as I have seen a slight increase in subs and views on my channel, so thank you. Today's video, I'm going to rank the tank specs going into Dragonflight, strictly from a Mythic Plus perspective. I'm not planning on discussing rating viability, as all of the tanks bring about the same in terms of damage reduction. Although each tank spec brings different utility, I just don't feel it's a huge impact for rating, as there are usually 18 other raiders with you that can potentially bring the same utility. If you have any questions about tank viability for raid, you can put it in the comment section below, and I'll be more than happy to answer it for you. It is important to note that opinions might vary, and that is completely okay. But remember, be respectful when providing feedback, as the sole purpose of this tier list is to help the WoW community with their choice of main or ult each season. Today's video will be primarily focused on Mythic Plus. Just to put it out there, I'm currently not a cutting edge, top 1% Mythic Plus dungeon delver. What I have achieved is Keystone Master since Season 1 of BFA, and most recently achieved Keystone Hero for Seasons 3 and 4. Along with my healer, we have pushed ourselves to make our goal of Keystone Hero a reality, and looking forward to pushing higher in Dragonflight. Remember, achieving Mythic Plus 20 keys will be the new bar, and we should see groups pushing even higher for Season 1. It is important to understand that this tier list is not permanent, and it could possibly change with updates and tunings over the course of the season. I am a huge advocate of the bring the player, not the class motto, meaning value the player's skill more than the class itself. This tier list should not discourage you from playing whichever spec you enjoy the most if having fun is your main drive when running Mythic Plus. The main goal of this tier list is to give my opinionated list of what I feel will be the 1 through 6 specs for the beginning of Dragonflight. With that out of the way, let's get started. First on the list, we're going to be discussing Protection Paladin. Protection Paladin was one of the last spec trees that became available when the Paladin trees were first released. They have gone through some changes compared to Shadowlands. One pretty impactful change was that Avenger Shield no longer generates holy power. This will affect your uses of Shield of the Righteous and Word of Glory, as haste values will tend to be lower at the beginning of an expansion at max level. The new talent trees will make it so you can take multiple talents that were once exclusive to just one from Shadowlands. You won't find much difference in gameplay style from Shadowlands. Just remember, it will take a little bit longer to generate holy power. Overall, I'm giving this spec an A. They will be bringing the damage and will be very tanky while staying in their Consecrate. The best part is that Consecrate is not too much of a crutch compared to another tank spec I'll talk about later. The only cons I can think of is the holy power management will probably be your biggest thing to worry about. Mobility is not bad with 2 charges of Divine Steed. I firmly believe this spec will not have any issues doing plus 20 keys in Season 1 of Dragonflight. Second on the list, we're going to discuss Blood DK. They were the dominant tank spec for Season 3 and 4, mostly with the great interaction of the 2 legendaries, the 4-piece bonus, and the gavel from the jailer. They were capable of keeping up Dancing Rune Weapon almost infinitely. However, with the release of Dragonflight, DK has gone through some changes. The most significant change is simply the ability of not being able to keep up Dancing Rune Weapon infinitely anymore. They were able to make copies of themselves, which is nice and good to see Blizzard kept that functionality. Blood has kept all the utility that you've grown to love with DK, AMZ, AMS, and Grip. Blood DK was my main for Season 3 and most of Season 4 before switching to Demon Hunter. I noticed after the 10.0 pre-patch release that DK seemed a little more softer. When doing plus 23s, for example, I felt that hits that used to not hurt so much would chunk me for a lot, and Deathstrike just didn't seem to heal it up like before. While I was still leading the healing meters, a lot more Deathstrikes were needed. Another thing I noticed, and I mentioned this about Consecrate for Paladins, is that Blood will heavily rely on Death and Decay, not only for damage reduction, but also for damage through Heartstrike. If you are used to just dropping Death and Decay to help gather mobs for threat, you may want to stop that and save it for standing in for damage and damage reduction. This is one of the reasons I've given Blood a B rating. For Mythic Plus, you need to be flexible and movable. While Grip does help bring adds to you, a lot of things like Sanguine, the Tornadoes, and to some extent Volcanic will require you to move the mobs pulling you out of your Death and Decay. At least Necrotic has been removed from the rotation, for now anyways. Overall, they will be bringing some damage and will be very tanky while staying in their Death and Decay. They will still have the utility that is desired for Mythic Plus, like Battle Res, a stun with Blinding Sleep, and during weeks where mobility doesn't matter, gripping mobs in for maximum AoE potential. The only cons I can think of is the requirement to almost always be in your Death and Decay and will probably be your biggest thing to worry about. DK mobility is not bad with 2 charges of Death's Advance and capable of speccing into Wraithwalk. I firmly believe this spec will not have any issues doing plus 20 keys in Season 1 of Dragonflight. Third on the list is Protection Warrior. They were just a trash spec for all of Shadowlands. With the introduction of the new talent system for Dragonflight, it leapfrogged from the bottom all the way up to S tier. I'm saying it now. This spec has gone through so many changes while keeping the fundamental design the same. Lots of ignore pain uptime and lots of rage generation. This spec is the tankiest out of all 6 tank specs including Blood DK. With the ability to keep up ignore pain, shield block, extra damage with shield slam, and thunderclap, I think this is going to be the go-to for special events like the Great Push and the Mythic Dungeon Invitational. Great mobility with leap, charge, and now shield charge. It's very hard to find any negatives with this spec. If I had to find a negative with this spec, it would be that its rotation is really boring. Thunderclap, Shield Slam, Revenge, Thunderclap. Then throw in your defenses like Ignore Pain or Shield Block. The damage output of Warrior is also the lowest out of all the tank specs too. I guess it's the price you pay for being so tanky. Lately, this has been my go-to tank in the pre-patch because it's just fun and addictive to play. If my other tank in my guild wasn't maining a prop warrior, this would have been my main. Overall, if you are new to tanking, especially in Dragonflight, you will put yourself on a solid footing by maining prop warrior. I foresee this spec being at the very tip of the spear for plus 30 or higher keys in Season 1. I'm not saying other tank specs won't achieve this, but I just feel this will be the easiest like Blood DK was in Shadowlands Season 3 and 4. Moving on to number 4 is Guardian Druid. I don't have a lot of experience playing this spec, mainly because in Shadowlands I didn't enjoy having to swap to Boomkin just to convoke for maximum damage. On top of that, shifting in and out of if I'm rooted. The other thing I disliked about Druid was having to manage whether or not I was going to use my rage for damage, heal myself, or use it on Iron Fur. So I know this is a lot of negatives right out of the gate, but I wanted to let you know up front that I'll try to not be biased when rating the Guardian Druid. Druid was the first tree released by Blizzard showcasing its new talent tree revamp. It looked very promising in the beginning until Blizzard later revealed other class spec trees that required 1 point into abilities while Druid was requiring 2 or sometimes 3 points into a talent. Blizzard has since gone through and changed a few things in the talent trees to make it a tad bit smoother. Guardian did see a nerf a couple times, and it has recently had its entire Guardian aura updated massively in the last week, giving it high damage and damage reduction capabilities while not relying on Moonfire spam as its sole damage generator. In my opinion, Guardian is easy to pick up and play, but hard to master. Along with its specialty specs of Feral, Boomkin, and Resto Affinity abilities, you can become a Grandmaster Guardian tank. Bear seems very good at mitigating damage, but does not mitigate magic damage very well. While it does have Iron Fur and Frenzied Regeneration, it requires you to manage your rage in order to use them. I'm putting Guardian in A tier behind Paladin. The main reason it stays in A tier is because it just pumps damage. Looking at number 5 on the list is Vengeance Demon Hunter. This has been my main tanking class since they were first developed back in Legion. I like the playstyle, and the demon aesthetic really gives it some class fantasy just like Death Knight. Unfortunately, since Legion, the class has had to rely on borrowed power for much of its strength in order to be slightly competitive. Season 1 of Shadowlands saw Vengeance become meta for the first time, but in my opinion for the wrong reasons. Simply being able to jump out of harm's way, best magic damage reduction, and the use of powerful sigils made Vengeance the go-to for Season 1 Mythic Plus. Why? Because all 6 tanks could not take the amount of damage being dealt, and Vengeance simply had the toolkit to run away and kite. The good news now is while still keeping that toolkit, borrowed power is technically gone, but has now been baked into our talent trees. For better or worse, I feel it's actually really good for this spec as it gives Vengeance more options that it simply never had before. Vengeance has had its mastery buff to not only give us bonus armor with demon spikes, but our base armor is also buffed based off a percentage of our agility. So Vengeance is just a tiny more tankier outside demon spikes. I'd argue Vengeance has the best burst damage and snap threat, great on UCDs, very good solo capabilities like Blood Death Knight, obviously great mobility, and last but not least, Chaos Brand. Brand is just an added bonus if you have a caster in the group. A lot of talents have been created to make Fell Devastation feel good. Frailty is the new debuff mechanic that allows for percent healing received based off damage done. Talents like Void Reaver modify Frailty to provide 4% damage reduction from the target, and Vulnerability modifies Frailty, increasing all damage you deal to targets by 4%. The cherry on top is Soul Crush, which allows Frailty to stack multiple times, increasing your damage, healing, and damage reduction. Oh, and one more thing. Blizzard made the souls so they can be collected like some 100 yards away. I've been able to soul cleave on the next pack, and I see orbs flying in from out of nowhere. If this sounds like a lot of changes that have taken place with Vengeance, you are not wrong. This class has basically been reworked from the ground up. There are currently 2 playstyle builds, Spirit Bomb and Fiery Brand build. So there are a lot of options on the table if you like one playstyle over the other. A couple negatives that have always played Vengeance and are still there is the fact that you will always play Demonic for Fell Devastation. Who doesn't want to stay in demon form after activation? Demon Spikes still have 2 charges, and I feel like the cooldown is still too long, making calcified spikes pretty much mandatory for Mythic Plus. So there is a small window where Vengeance can be susceptible to a lot of damage with no active mitigation available. Fiery Brand, nice defensive, but primarily used more for its offensive capabilities, and it's a targetable damage reduction, so that's pretty terrible. Depending on your playstyle, at level 70, access to Sigil of Misery is painful because a lot of points need to be spent for unnecessary talents like Lost in Darkness. This has been a pretty long write-up for Vengeance, and I could go on for more. The spec I feel received the most rework, but at the same time still feels kind of empty in the talent trees compared to like Warrior and Death Knight, who both received brand new talents or talents from past expansions. Vengeance received abilities and passives in their trees that had already existed from the last 3 expansions. Overall, I give this spec an A. It would deserve an S tier if it only had better mitigation like a Warrior in terms of Ignore Pain or Iron Fur that has stackable use damage mitigation. Demon Spikes is fine and it's powerful, but unfortunately has a cooldown. Last and certainly least, coming in at number 6 is Brewmaster Monk. I don't know what Blizzard did to this spec, but they just completely ruined it for me. It's getting a D for me because I just can't justify spending so much time explaining why it's bad. It could be longer than my write-up for Vengeance. If you like a lot of buttons, play Brewmaster. It's like playing Windwalker, but you can tank. So many unused CDs and active abilities, I ran out of room on my action bars. First pull and a plus 15, I got 2-shotted. Damage reduction abilities for Monk are just not there, and they were never available for me because they were always on cooldown. I had to rely so much on my healer that after a plus 15 key, I put it away and never logged back in. It was not fun to play Brewmaster at all. I'm sorry for those that enjoyed it. I really enjoyed the Shadowlands version of Brewmaster, but the Dragonflight version is getting shelved until they can fix it. I hope Blizzard takes a look at Brewmaster for 10.1 and fixes its shortcomings. So what am I maining for Shadowlands and what will my ults be? I'm going with Vengeance for Dragonflight as my main. I've been having a lot of fun and I enjoy the mobility. Like I said earlier, if my co-tank wasn't maining Warrior for Dragonflight, I probably would have went with Warrior. That is my number 1 choice, followed by Vengeance at number 2. So my first tank alt that I will be leveling will be the Warrior. Guardian will be my second tank alt because it will be killing 2 birds with 1 stone. Not only will I be leveling it for tanking, but it's my herb mining character and I need it to feed my demon hunter professions. Thanks for stopping by. I hope you enjoyed the video. Please click on the like button if you enjoyed this content. Subscribe if you'd like to see more. I humbly ask you to make sure your comments are constructive and have meaningful purpose. I know these types of videos can make people heated, especially if it's against their main. But I'd be interested in your opinions, especially Monk, on the reason you are choosing to main it for Dragonflight. Thanks for stopping by.